Welcome back to Restless. My name is Father Joseph Gill, priest of the Diocese of Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is full of Italians. In fact, many of the parishes I've been at have been built by Italians. And as we are coming up to Columbus Day weekend, which, did you know Christopher Columbus is Italian? He's not Portuguese.
I did know.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah, so he's Italian. So we kind of wanted to focus on all things Italian, especially because a couple of us have lived in Italy, not just visited, but actually spent quality time there of a significant nature. So allow me to introduce my co-host. We've got Lauren to my left. Hi, Lauren.
Hello.
Lauren has lived many other places in the world, but not Italy.
I can't say I've lived elsewhere in the world, but I've traveled.
Well, you've spent, what was the longest you traveled?
6 weeks.
That's pretty long.
In Spain, España.
Spain, yeah, okay. That's pretty good amount of time. And so I'd like to introduce our other co-host who's sitting right across from me, Daniel. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. Father.
Yeah, we're great to have you, and definitely hope you become a regular here on Restless.
Well, we'll see what the people say in response.
Exactly. Well, if you pass Lauren's test, because I'll say, oh, Lauren, what about this person? No, they're boring. So, so Lauren,
have I ever actually said that?
There's a few people that you turned down, but
with good reason.
With good reason, definitely. But Lauren said, no, what about Daniel? Because Daniel's funny.
Oh, boy.
And I was like, well, I'm not just talking about his looks. I mean, we got to... No.
That's usually what I get.
No, so thank you so much for joining. So tell us a little bit, first of all, I know that we all work at this wonderful Catholic school, Cardinal Kung Academy. This is not sponsored by Cardinal Kung, but you should definitely send your kids there.
Maybe one day.
Yeah, well, I think we have to sponsor them. I don't know they have the money to sponsor a radio show. But so what do you teach here, Daniel?
Yes. My first year teaching at Cardinal Kung Academy, I teach 4 sections of Latin, Latin 1, Latin 2, Latin 3, and an upper level class called Christian Latin, and then ancient literature, which is an English class. So it's a class in translation, but we read Greek and Roman works.
Oh, very cool.
The Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, St. Augustine's Confession, some Greek tragedies.
So you're a classics guy.
Classics guy.
All the way through. Where'd you study?
Well, I started in Fairfield. Well, it's called Fairfield Ward High School. So I grew up in the town of Fairfield, Connecticut.
Oh, nice. Local,
okay. And attended the public schools there and went to Fairfield Ward High School. Some of the older listeners may remember when it was one high school. My sister was the last year of that class, and it split off into 2 high schools, Fairfield Ward and Fairfield Ludlow. So I took Latin for 4 years. Then I went to
That's
Dallas.
Great that they had Latin, because I think most public high schools don't have Latin anymore.
That's right. Although if you're going to find it, it's more likely in this part of the country than in other parts.
Okay.
The Northeast. There is a great tradition of exam public schools in places like Boston Latin School, the oldest public school in America, Boston Latin Academy.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah. I think founded by Benjamin Franklin, or he attended it or something to that effect.
Wow. Lauren, did you take Latin at all?
Never.
No.
Only Spanish.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Whereas in high school, I took both Italian and Latin for 4 years. I enjoy the complement of a modern and an ancient language. The Italian will come into play later in this conversation.
Did you get confused between the two?
At times, yes. At times, I still do.
I mean, Latin is to Italian what Old English is to English.
Yeah.
Sort of, right? So
yeah. Yes. What does help if you maintain the so-called classical pronunciation, or some people call it restored pronunciation, which sounds much different from Italian. So in the church, we would always say, the equivalent of, now I'm not thinking of an example.
Dominus vobiscum.
Vobiscum, exactly. Where you say the V in classical Latin, it'd be more like vobiscum. Every C is a hard C. Kaisar, Cicero instead of Cicero, etc. So if you have the classical pronunciation, it then makes the 2 languages seem more different. Latin
Interesting.
and Italian. So that helped. That's what
cool.
I used in high school.
That's cool.
And then from there, I went to the University of Dallas, a small Catholic liberal arts college in Irving, Texas.
Woo, UD.
UD, yeah.
Good place down there.
Very good place. At least one parish priest here in Stanford, right down the road here at St. Cecilia's, is a UD alum. I've only just met him once. I've forgotten his name.
Father John Connaughton.
Exactly.
I did not know he was a UD alum.
Proud alum.
Very proud.
Well, I'm a Franciscan grad, and so I don't know if there's a rivalry, but
a bit of tension.
You should not go to UD. You should go to Franciscan.
You should certainly go to UD. In fact, just last night I was looking at menus of diners in Irving, Texas, where UD is located, and the nostalgia just overcame me. The chicken fried steak and the sweet tea and the other delights of Texas living.
Is obesity the biggest problem now?
It's a big problem all over America, but yes, more so in Texas than Connecticut.
Yeah, with that kind of food.
Yes, it is delicious though.
Oh my gosh.
You in Texas, even in the Metroplex, you might still have a waitress who says to you, "God bless you," at the end of a meal. It's the last meal I had in Texas at a diner a number of years ago now. I remember the waitress, she ended by saying, "God bless you."
That's really cool.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, you
Yep.
don't see that up here in the Northeast.
No.
God bless you. I sue you.
Yeah, banned by law.
Exactly.
And so at UD, I studied Greek and Latin for 4 years, majored in classical philology, went to Rome for the first time. So the subject of this lesson, of this episode.
A true teacher at heart.
And I always wanted to return to Italy after that time, but it would take a little while. I went to Tufts University to get a master's degree in classics, graduated from there in 2015, UD in 2013, while up in Boston, did a student teaching apprenticeship, you might say, with Mrs. Alice Langton, who's a Latin teacher at Newton South High School, another public high school right outside of Boston. And I got hired on there and taught in the two public high schools of Newton for 5 years. And during the pandemic, September of 2020, I skipped Dodge and moved to Rome. And matriculated at the Pontifical Salesian University to study in the Department of Christian and Classical Literature, earned technically an Italian BA, and I'm now finishing up the thesis. Finishing up is a euphemism for beginning to write the thesis. That will get me a licenza, or in English we'd say a license. Sometimes we also hear the word licentiate, but a master's degree effectively, but the Vatican term for a master's degree, so a license.
Are you going on for a doctorate?
I don't think so.
No,
I don't think so.
Max out there.
As I've always said, I don't have a dissertation in me. We'll see if I even have an MA thesis in me. It's ambiguous, but this would be the second master's degree, but the first one written in Italian, so that elongates the writing process a bit.
Yeah.
And then to complete the story, I reached out to Dr. Miller, the headmaster here, and to ask if there was an opening. So I really liked the look of Cardinal Kung Academy from all these years I've been reading about it. Wanted to move back home to the diocese after all these Odyssean wanderings. And fortunately, there was an opening. And so now I know both of you.
Well, it is very hard to find a Latin teacher. I'll say they're few and far between. It's probably one of the hardest fills in a Catholic school. But
it's a bull market if you're a candidate.
Yeah, it definitely is.
Yeah,
definitely is. I mean, do you feel like it's a dying language, or are people starting to study it more now?
Believe it or not, from the data I've seen this contradicted, but the data I remember seeing is that Latin hit its nadir in either the 60s or 70s. Enrollment just completely collapsed. It had been very common in public schools and certainly in all Catholic schools. Now it's rare even in Catholic schools, quite frankly.
Well, I went through 9 years of seminary and never took Latin. And people are shocked by that.
Yep.
But I've never taken it.
Yep.
I took it for one semester in high school, and it was the only class I've ever failed.
Oh, wow.
And I never picked it up again.
It was your Waterloo.
It was my water. It was, and I'm glad I don't live, 100 years ago, because I wouldn't be a priest.
You wouldn't be a priest.
I had to study Latin.
Well, I think you would have been fine with more preparation.
Probably.
That's my read.
I was homeschooled. I didn't have a teacher.
Oh, okay.
So if I had you, as a teacher, probably would do quite well.
Yeah, you would have fled in the opposite direction.
Maybe.
Maybe lost your vocation. No. In fact, a seminarian friend of mine, I won't name him, but I will say a seminary, the Diocese of Jefferson City, Missouri, said that in his experience, the seminaries, the bishops always speak about how important Latin is, and then do effectively everything possible to make it so you cannot fit Latin into your schedule. So, but Latin is bursting. It is budding, maybe I should say, outside of the context of Catholic seminaries and outside of the context of public schools. There has been somewhat of a regrowth, even in the public school system, but particularly schools like Cardinal Kung Academy, these K through 12 schools following a classical model in which Latin is really surging, either Catholic classical schools or public charter schools like the Great Hearts Network, which is really big down in Texas and Arizona. So in fact, if you want to teach high school Latin, there are a lot of openings, not so much in Connecticut, but in places like Texas, Arizona, where there's a lot more educational, let's say, creativity, innovation, more freedom as well. Have public charter schools that teach it, stuff like that.
Well, there's that old saying, what is old is new again. Right. So people are, for a whole generation, we threw it out because, it's, smacks of oldness. And now you're like, oh, how innovative. Right? To teach Latin. Like, we've actually been doing it for 2,000 years, but innovative, sure.
That's right. Same thing is true of phonics. If you followed some of these news where phonics is now becoming mainstream in some public school systems. And I remember when I was a child, it was part of sort of the so-called culture wars. And if you supported phonics, it meant you were a conservative Republican. If you opposed phonics, it meant you were a liberal Democrat. But there are now a lot of mainstream extreme educational folks who would normally be considered left of center, who are adopting a position that in the 80s and 90s was right of center.
Wow.
Phonics is good, direct instruction and pronunciation and spelling is good. So yeah, what is old becomes new again.
Well, I'm glad that here at this school we diagram sentences.
Yeah, that's
which
the
is
next
awesome.
step.
Did you ever do that,
I
Lauren?
never did that in
No.
public school.
Do you understand how it works?
No, I don't know anything about it.
I think it's like a game. I've always enjoyed diagramming sentences.
I never got to diagram a sentence
No?
attending public schools in the 1990s. So
Yeah, sit in on the class here.
Oh.
It's pretty fun.
we'll do.
Well, let's talk about Italy.
Yeah.
Because it is Columbus Day weekend, and Italy is such a great country. Such a Catholic country. So, I mean, certainly, Lauren, you have a lot of Italian friends, I'm sure.
Yes, and I am Italian.
Are you? What percentage?
Like 40, 38.
That's
'Cause
very
I'm-
specific.
Very specific.
38.7.
Well, my mom is Italian and a quarter Finnish, right? So I'm an eighth Finnish.
Finnish.
Yes.
That's cool.
Only in America,
Yeah, really.
the old saying goes.
Yeah, and then my dad's Irish, so I'm half Irish on the other side.
Okay.
Do you know the expression for someone who's both Italian and Irish?
What?
A green meatball.
Green? I've never heard that.
Yeah.
I have not either, but I've seen pasta and potatoes,
Yes.
and people
that's
say it's
good.
a great combination.
Yes, there's
Not the same meal necessarily.
gnocchi. Isn't gnocchi made
Oh, that's
from-
true. That is
Gnocchi
true.
delicious.
That is true.
Which is delicious,
That is
right?
true, yes.
Which
So-
I know how to make.
Do you know how to make gnocchi? I thought it was just like mashed potatoes but with pasta sauce.
No,
Definitely not.
but we'll have to make it for you.
Please do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will accept any and all food that is
I
made
know.
for me. So how long did you live in Italy?
I lived there for 3 years.
3 years. Wow.
From mid-September of 2020 until August of 2023. And before then, cumulatively counting the semester and the trips back I went, when I went with students, I led students or co-led students to Rome 4 times. In total, I'd already spent about 6 months of my life there. So
Okay.
we could add it up to about 3 years, 6 months.
3.5.
something like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
3.5. Yeah.
So did you do all the touristy things? I know, Lauren, you haven't been, but like what touristy things would you want to see and do in Italy? Because it's, I mean, probably the number one tourist attraction, tourist destination, I'd imagine. Certainly up there.
Definitely. I mean, I don't know, everything in Rome. I mean, the Vatican, of course, the Pantheon. I was an architecture student, so we looked at a lot of buildings that are in Italy.
Sure.
So it would be a joy. I mean, I love walking through cathedrals, and I know there are beautiful churches everywhere.
Yeah. Did you see all the typical touristy things?
I think so. Places like the Roman Forum, the Vatican, the Pantheon, as you said, your major basilicas like Santa Maria Maggiore, St. Mary Major. Many Catholics go on pilgrimage, visit the catacombs, whether of St. Callistus, St. Priscilla, St. Sebastian, there are a whole bunch of others. So yeah, I think I did probably all of the major things at one point or another. Chiesa Nuova, the Jesuit Church, St. Ignatius.
Which is so ironic. It's Chiesa Nuova means new church. It was built in the 1700s.
Yeah.
Right. But for Rome, that's new.
For Rome, it's very
recent.
new, yes.
So where'd you travel outside of Rome? Did you go anywhere else?
Within Italy?
Yeah.
Yes. My grandparents are from southern Italy, from the toe of the boot, Calabria.
Ah.
So I took a number of trips to their home village, which they only went back to once after they immigrated. They were not overcome by nostalgia in the way you kind of get a divide amongst those who leave their country.
Well, I've heard there's a ton of poverty in Calabria.
Absolutely. Yep. Ton of poverty and unfortunately a lot of organized crime. They say that it's actually stronger now or worse, the situation in Calabria, say, than in Sicily. Whereas we in this country tend to associate organized crime with Sicily. Apparently it's even worse in Calabria now. I don't know.
Still, wow.
Yeah. But no, many places, Naples as well, and Campania. So that's south of Rome. And that's also another extraordinary city I'd really recommend visiting. It's a little bit grittier than Rome and even potentially dirtier than Rome. And Rome isn't the cleanest city.
Oh, yeah.
But it's really blessed with beautiful, beautiful churches and also great museums for classical antiquity. And then places like Florence and Venice, of course, Arezzo, a great Tuscan town, Orvieto, which some people know for its beautiful cathedral.
And the Eucharistic miracle.
And the
Which is
Eucharistic.
in Orvieto.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That was actually the town where the Feast of Corpus Christi originated. So it was a Eucharistic miracle where, again, the priest didn't believe, and the host started to bleed, and so the corporal is still there. I don't know if they still have the host. I don't think they do.
I don't recall.
But the corporal which is the cloth that goes on the altar, still has blood stains, and they actually process with that during the Feast of Corpus Christi in Orvieto, and it was because of that the Pope declared the Feast of Corpus Christi in the church. And one thing that's really interesting, I was actually in Orvieto for the Feast of Corpus Christi, which was wild because they line the street with flower petals in designs. Like they glue them to like paper that's placed on the street. And it must be like 3 or 4 miles worth of flower petals that are in these unbelievable intricate designs with, you'll see a monstrance on the ground. You'll see all sorts of things. And the only person that can walk on it is the priest carrying the Blessed Sacrament. Everyone else walks along the side. Just absolutely a moving experience to be there.
Oh, yeah, you were blessed to be there.
I was, yeah. That was one of the highlights of my year I spent in Italy.
Oh, tremendous. When were you there?
So I did a year in seminary at the North American College in Rome. It was 2006 to 2007.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Not long before I was first there, which was 2011.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know the NAC, as it's called, the North American College, from having a number of, we got tours as we were students there, spent a semester there in 2011, but then going back, I've known a couple of seminarians there, and the NAC has one of the best views of Rome. It's one of the absolute best properties. It was a typically American, brilliant investment in real estate after the Second World War. Italy was devastated. Only America and the whole world had money. And the bishop said, well, we're going to have to expand our seminary, and bought this magnificent property on the Janiculum Hill.
It's on the hill, right?
Oh, it's an amazing deal.
It is, yeah. And it's a 5-story building. So you get to the top and you can see absolutely everything, 360 view of everything.
360, yep.
So living in a different country is quite a culture shock. And, I know, Lauren, you've traveled enough that you know that there can be some culture shock moments. And I'm sure you've experienced that in Spain. So what kind of was, what did you like about Italian culture? What did you not like about Italian culture?
Oh, yeah. I suppose I was very happy. So the overall experience is certainly positive. I will say Italy, Rome, I'll just focus on Rome. So if I say Italy, I do want to put a caveat that, the country changes and my experiences are predominantly in that one place.
Yeah.
So a big city. It's very dirty. And so they'll say the culture of cleaning up after your dog, not to debase the level of the conversation, is not quite as advanced as it is in my experience growing up in Connecticut.
Well, the number of people I saw personally, people going to the bathroom on the street was shocking to me.
Shocking.
It's just not done in America.
Not nearly.
Really.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I would say compared to, say, Boston, I lived in Boston for 7 years, and Boston is vastly cleaner. I mean, there must be very unclean neighborhoods, but the average part of Boston is vastly cleaner than Rome. And that was something that really wore on me. It was something that I initially noticed, and then it stopped being maybe as much of a concern, but it wore on me as time went on. I think if you're born somewhere with a certain expectation of public cleanliness, it's hard to live out the whole rest of your life in somewhere that's really dirty.
That's so true. That's so true.
But there's a paradox that was pointed out to me many years ago before I could even evaluate it, but it is so true that Italian public spaces aren't necessarily that clean. There's a lot of graffiti, a lot of trash, but Italian homes are very clean, typically. It's not as though people's homes are treated the way the public spaces are. There's a different approach of what the public space is. On the one hand, you're in it so much more in Italian life because you're walking on average more than you are in America, less car dependent, the piazza culture. So on the one hand, you're living in that space. And maybe for that reason, familiarity breeds, not necessarily contempt as the expression goes, but it breeds a certain level of, carelessness.
Functionality.
Functionality.
You just have to get there.
You just have to get there. So now I'm in the piazza. I'm in it all the time. This is part of my home in some sense. So I'll throw the trash out. Something like maybe it's going on psychologically, but it's not as though people's homes are like that. The homes are very clean and very pleasant in my experience.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good to hear. So that was the negative. What were some positives that you took from Italian culture?
I mean, I would say, of course, a lot of good food. That goes without saying. Not that everything is perfectly done. I mean, it depends on where you're eating or what products you're eating. You can get, it's not that all the food in the grocery store is so amazing. You have the same problems. You're in a big city. The culture is modernizing. People are further removed from the countryside, the sources of their food. So you have, in general terms, the same problems you would have in the United States. But on average, people are closer and they care more. Is what I would say, that the standard is higher because people just care a little bit more about food. It's more of a topic of conversation. The culture of cooking, at least doing some of the food prep yourself, is much greater than it is here. So I think in America, you can get absolutely the best food and the best ingredients, but we simply don't care as much. We don't put as much effort in. They do on average. So I loved eating the food. And one of the things I liked is that whereas America is such a mishmash of cultures and is seemingly becoming ever more so, Rome is still a very almost parochial city, which has its negatives, in Italy in general. There's a certain aversion to the other and to the outsider, the one who isn't Italian, in a way that's not the case in the United States. But the positive of that is that there's a very strong local culture wherever you go. And so a lot of the food I ate in Rome, I would never have eaten if I had stayed in Naples or if I lived in Milan.
They do. Yeah, it's very...
There's a localized food culture, which I like.
Definitely.
traditions.
I'm curious, because when I talk to people from France or Spain, and a lot of times their only experience of America is New York City, and so of course their impression is, oh wow, such a dirty, mean, unfriendly country. And I'm like, well, you just have to get out of the city, So have you found that, Lauren, in the cities that you've visited in Spain, like if cities are just kind of maybe not the right slice of the culture?
Yeah, there's certainly variation everywhere. I think like Madrid, for instance, major big city, but then as soon as you leave that, you're in the countryside of Spain. It's totally different, and the south is different from the north and all that, the east and the west.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I will say, being from Connecticut and growing up in Greenwich, only 30 miles from New York City, I use New York City as a target all the time when I'm abroad. Because they're like, Connecticut? I'm like, close to New York.
But you know I'm New York.
New York City. And they go,
Close to New
oh,
York, yes.
New York. I'm like, yes.
Right. Yeah. No, that is true.
Yes.
That is helpful. Definitely.
But I have found, though, being abroad, which I like, people are always positive about the United States. And they say, oh, I've been, and then they'll tell you where, or they'll say, I really want to go. I've wanted to go my whole life.
And where have they been? Is it usually New York?
I think it ranges, it could be California, Florida, or like I have family in North Carolina, you know what I mean? Like it totally, everyone talks like that too.
They do.
No, I'm kidding.
The last time I was in Italy I took a father-son pilgrimage there in 2018. Yeah, 2018. And so I got grilled with so many questions about, what do you think of Donald Trump? Like, can we not talk about Donald Trump over in Italy, please?
Great guy.
But
that's all you got to say.
Well, the rest of the world, the rest of the world hated him.
Right.
They hated Donald Trump. Oh my gosh.
That would have been funny.
And I was like, I don't want to get into a big debate with some Italian guy because my Italian's not that good.
Right. Although there would be many who actually liked him, even in Italy.
Oh, did you find that?
Perhaps not as a great. Yeah. Because Italy just swept the center right into power with an enormous victory.
That's true. Marconi?
Maloney. Yeah.
Maloney.
Yeah. The Italians have, in recent decades, tended to vote for the right. So there are, in truth, many Italians who like Trump, but those who don't are much more prominent in the culture.
That's probably the same as America.
Yeah, exactly. For better and for worse.
Listen, the voices versus, yeah.
That's right.
It's real people.
But, you seem to have a different experience living in Italy than Daniel did.
Yes, I was supposed to stay there for 3 years in my seminary studies, and I stayed there for only one and asked to come back for a couple of reasons. One is I am not a city person, and I found that dynamic to be rather stark, in living in a city that was unfriendly. You can't, especially I struggled with languages. It's not my gift. And so I couldn't really get to know the common people on the street. I wouldn't have conversations with people because I just couldn't hold my own.
Right.
So it was very I felt very isolated. I was like, I can go into the college and that's about it. And I was surprised how many people don't speak English well. They'll try a little bit, and in this most, the big tourist shops, of course, they'll speak some English. But if you really want to get to know people and the culture, it's like, yeah.
It's not Germany or Sweden in terms of their English proficiency, not even close.
Right,
Italy.
Right. So, my best times of there, I actually purposely did not go to many of the big cities. Never been to Florence, never been to Milan, never been to Naples. I heard Naples is really dirty, so I didn't go down there. I spent most of my time when we'd have free weekends going into the countryside. And so I would actually, from my fourth floor room at the NAC, I could look out and see the Apennine Mountains, which run right down the center. So what I would do is I'd go on Google Maps and just basically be like, what am I looking at? And I go over there, oh, this little town, let's go visit that this weekend. And so I'd hop a bus or a train and just go to some random town that's really super tiny. And that I found a refreshing and new experience of Italy. For example, one of the stories I really warmed my heart, we were, I did several camping trips out there as well. And so I was backpacking through the Apennines for a weekend. And we totally just misjudged, because it was Palm Sunday weekend, and this was, mid-April. It was nice and warm. So we get up there, and when the start of the trail, there was snow, like a foot and a half of snow on the ground. We're like, we are totally unprepared for this. We had short sleeves and shorts and tennis shoes.
Right.
So we tried to camp out the first night. It was really uncomfortable and freezing cold. The next night, we're like, well, let's keep hiking. So we hike, and we actually left the snow zone and went down further south, but we were soaked through. So we get to this tiny little town called Roccapietra. And we go into the town and we're like, oh my gosh, we're so soaked. And so we start striking this conversation with some person like, hey, do you know any place that we can hang out for a while because we're so cold. We just want to warm up. And they're like, let's open the entire town hall for you. Now, their town hall is about the size of your living room. It's not huge. But they open up this town hall. They start bringing us food. They give us like portable heaters, and we just kind of sit there and and dry our clothes. Yeah, it's like, space heaters. And I was like, this is what real Italy is like, and that's probably the case with every country.
Right.
Even America, right? I mean, you have to get outside of Greenwich too to experience that. But the people are very
shots fired to a little town.
Greenwich is where the rich New Yorkers go to live. But
there's a good amount of diversity in Greenwich too.
Is there?
Yeah.
Oh, good. But
big town.
But you get outside the city, and that was the refuge for me, was having that experience. You see, I think it helped me to experience what real Italian culture is like outside the tourist zones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it takes some time to get to know Rome, because everything you said is true and is valid. I have a friend, or someone I'm friendly with, who just completed his seminary studies for the Diocese of Providence, and he really did not enjoy his first year. It was somewhat similar to what you described. He was perhaps a bit more of a city person because he lived in Boston, but wasn't fundamentally a big city person. I don't think terribly gifted with the languages, and didn't want to continue. And something he said that was interesting was that when he came back, because he had to for that second year, he was far more comfortable with Italian. And I've heard many people say that sometimes taking a break in language study paradoxically leads to your being more comfortable. I don't know why. Like, it cleanses the mind a little bit, or there's time for concepts to solidify. So some people find that. And I think by the end, he enjoyed the city more than he had the first time. But that is an interesting thing, because you have seminarians who are sent there, in this case, it's Americans, who don't necessarily want to go, or wouldn't have otherwise chosen to go there, at least to live there. And you just drop there, whether or not you're a city person. And it is difficult. But I will say, I had the experience of Rome. It's a little bit different. Both in that I developed greater language fluency. And my experience with the city, the first time I was there, was certainly more that it wasn't so friendly. But when I came back with much more Italian and more self-confidence, I noticed people were friendlier. So to some degree, it's just a function, as you were indicating, of knowing the language. But another feature is I lived in the municipal city of Rome, but not in the historical center, because the Pontifical Salesian University is one of the youngest of the Pontifical universities, and it's located outside of the historical center because it came to be in the 60s, and all the real estate had been bought up in the center. So it's in what the Italians call la periferia, the periphery. So it's almost like a quote-unquote suburban part of the city, but it's still Rome. Same mayor, same political system, but it's outside of the core. And where I lived, that piazza, it was like being in a small town.
Oh, I'm sure.
It was big city, big density, but
no tourists out there.
No tourists, no foreigners except immigrants and a handful of students. So hardly anyone spoke English. And the coffee shop that I would go to pretty much every morning, right across the street from an elementary school, and Tiziana, one of the baristas who I saw every day, said she loved her job because she would watch those children grow up, from 5 to 6 to 7, 8 to 9 to 10. Then they go off to middle school and high school, but they'd pop in occasionally. Someone would come to work for her. Even after they were in their 20s, they might come back to visit, or they stayed in the neighborhood because Italians tend to be a little bit more rooted. So I lived in Rome, but in a village within Rome. And I think once you get outside of those big tourist areas, you find it's still a city of villages.
That's good to hear. Good to hear. Now let's turn, for the last couple of minutes that we have, to the faith aspect. So first of all, did your faith grow spending so much time around the history, the richness in the Vatican, the art, the beauty in Rome? And also, what did you perceive in the faith in Italy in general? Because I hear a lot of negative things about how the faith is so dying in Italy and so many of these other countries. So what was your experience of faith personally and culturally over there?
I was lucky to be in a very Catholic context, even within the context of Rome, because I was attending a Pontifical University. So many of my classmates were priests. A few of them were nuns, but most of them were priests, in fact. And a lot of the professors were Salesian priests. So there was this ever-present Catholicism, even more than for the average person. Unfortunately, the city can have a museum feel. I think it does depend on what you bring to it. If you're the average secular visitor who goes, the churches are like museums. You go into, you interrupt Mass without any concern. You walk by the Eucharist without any concern because you have no idea. It doesn't matter. It doesn't mean anything to you. So I think it depends on what you bring to it. If you bring something to it and you're genuinely a seeker, even if you're not a believer, it can have a profound effect. There have been many conversion stories. For me personally, it was good. It was definitely good. Up to a point. I don't find it necessarily very easy to believe in the soul and things like that. It helps me very much in my faith to see beauty. So architecture, art is a huge help. Worshiping in a beautiful church, hearing beautiful music is very, very helpful to me. Like here at Cardinal Kung Academy.
We do have beautiful music.
Beautiful music.
Really.
Also very nice altar, and the way that you conduct mass and the altar servers do, that reverence helps me a lot. But at a certain point, whether you're in Rome or anywhere else, it just brings you up to a certain point, right? The beauty. You then have to ask yourself, do I really believe, and am I willing to make the sacrifices? And that's no easier in Rome or harder than it is anywhere else. So I would say it helped me because it rooted me historically. I love history. I saw so much beauty. But at the end of the day, whether I stayed there or came back to Fairfield, the same problems remain, the same temptations to sin. And I wouldn't say Rome, once you get beyond that, is a particularly distinguished diocese as things are now. I think there's more Eucharistic adoration, for instance, in Boston, where I lived before, a better quality of Mass, quite frankly. Once you get outside of the historical churches where they maintain a higher standard, the average, frankly, Italian parish, in my experience in Rome, hideously ugly building built in the 60s or 70s. I mean, crushingly ugly, and frankly, a terrible liturgy. I don't mean to be dismissive, but really hard to maintain a faith when something is just so ugly, so brutal. So leaving Rome was actually very helpful to me because I wanted to get away from that. And I go to more beautiful churches here in Connecticut, Fairfield County, than I did in Rome, typically, unless I went to the center specifically.
Sure.
And then
that could be a reason why so many people are leaving the faith in Italy.
Yes.
Parishes are ugly and liturgies are bad.
Exactly. Because there is this perception we have of Rome, or we see the core parts of these historic cities. We say, oh, this is how everyone lives. And once you get outside of that, you see that people's lives are not that different from Americans' lives. They're different, but they're car-centered still. There's a lot more cars and a need for automobile. Things are spread out. A lot of the buildings are new construction. It's really not so different. And, Fairfield, where I live, the town, is far more beautiful than the neighborhood I lived in Rome, as an example.
Wow.
But anyway, that's maybe a subject for a longer time. But to finish about the state, it's not in a great state. There's a lot of individual good, and there are collective good organizations that are good there in Rome, and movements that are strong in Italy. But on a macro level, you look, the birth rate is among the lowest in the history of the world, of any country in Italy, and it's been like that for decades. The country's population is shrinking. Church attendance is dropping dramatically. Most of the faith that you see is cultural, funerals, sometimes the sacraments leading up to that. But people are not choosing to go every Sunday. They're not choosing to live out, particularly the difficult teachings of the church, any more there than anywhere else. Maybe more than in France, let's say. So there is degradations, but it's not a better situation than the United States.
Yeah.
Probably worse.
One of the things we were blessed, I think, being in the United States is that there's religious competition, in that there's Protestants that are doing things really, really well, which means that a lot of the Catholics have to kind of step up their game. Better evangelization, better formation, better liturgies, things like that. So
I agree completely.
So, and when it's a monoculture like Italy, which is 98% Catholic, and it would be very hard pressed to find a Protestant church, there's not that sense of like, well, we have to do our share, otherwise we're going to lose them, because it's kind of like, well, we're never going to lose them, right? They're all Catholic. They'll always be Catholic.
And I think there's an intentionality. When you're a Catholic in a Protestant country, you stay Catholic more so because you really believe in being Catholic. We do have cultural Catholicism in the U.S. I'm Catholic because I'm Polish, because I'm Italian, but that fades pretty rapidly.
Within a generation or two. Yeah.
And you just have to decide. Whereas Italy, of course I'm Catholic, I'm Italian.
Right.
But that's not that meaningful.
Yeah.
I'd rather you be a Protestant who's convicted than a Catholic in that sense.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, thanks, and enjoy your Columbus Day coming up this weekend. We're looking forward to celebrating all things Italian. Go have a great Italian meal. Pray for the country of Italy. And if you're Italian, happy Columbus Day. And Daniel, thanks for joining us. And Lauren, thanks for joining us too. You can find us on Veritas Catholic Network, 1350 AM or 103.9 FM. Tune in next time.